You didn't get this far by mistake. You weren't just fortunate. They underestimated you in every fight, storm, and crisis. It all led you here. And now, as you stand in your authority, unshaken and invincible, you understand something. You were never intended to fit in, never intended to be ordinary. You were picked. You have been called. The weight you carried was not for nothing. It was sculpting, refining, and preparing you for this exact time. They attempted to break and confine you. You attempted to twist your light into something little and controllable. But the fire inside you was never intended to be contained. It is too brilliant, clean, and heavenly to be darkened by people who fear it. And now they can feel it. That change in the air, that definite presence, signifies the end of their power over you. No more shrinking, explaining, or asking for permission to be who you were born to be. Step into it. Own it. Your home, soul, and very being. It is blessed not by them, not by circumstance, but by something far larger. No power on earth can take it away from you. Stand up, go ahead, and never look back. The chosen, don't beg for a place at the table. We built our own. They have always used the same techniques. Subtle jabs, planned stillness, and the weight of expectation all pushed down without words. They presume that the previous regulations still apply. That reluctance will hold you as previously, and the need to satisfy will overpower your determination. But this time, there is just quiet, a gap where obedience once was. Their uncertainty develops into discomfort. Their intuition warned them that something fundamental had changed. In desperation, they escalate, expecting to elicit a response that would restore the pattern that previously held them in control. They poke at the past, hurling insults and weaving manipulation into their words. Anything to bring you back in. However, their reach is limited. Their attempts are ineffective against the quiet that surrounds them. The version of you they once discarded, the power they said could never exist, now stands before them. Not enraged, but detached. And that lack of feeling, that reluctance to interact, is what sends chills down their spine. Don't be fooled. God is not mocked because whatever a man sows, he will reap according to Galatians 6 verse 7. A riverside tree doesn't beg for rain. An eagle makes no apologies for flying higher than those who refuse to fly. And the chosen one does not shoulder burdens that were not theirs to bear. For a long time, the equilibrium seemed genuine. It seemed stable. It felt unshakable. But this is because it was never balanced. It was about endurance. You were bearing more than your fair share, carrying what was intended to shatter them, so they wouldn't have to bear the consequences of their own actions. Your patience, grace, and unwavering heart kept the illusion intact. They thrived on it. They interpreted your explanations as authorization. Your sacrifice is an expectation you place on them, like a bottomless well from which they may draw at any time. They never stopped to consider if you, too, may run empty, whether your back would hurt from the weight of duties that were never supposed to be yours. If your compassion had limitations. But everything has a season, and that season has ended. Now, the weight changes. The earth underneath them starts to quake. Not because you pressed them. You did not fight back, you just moved away. You are no longer carrying what others refuse to bear. You no longer explain yourself to people who have made up their minds. You no longer sweeten the facts to make people feel better. And when you remove yourself from the situation, they are left alone to face the truth they have spent so long suppressing. Oh, how they panic. They look for the older version of you, the one who would run to repair, explain, and heal. However, that version no longer exists. They resort to outdated methods such as guilt, duty, and the tacit expectation that you will always be waiting. However, they are faced by something they were not expecting. This stillness isn't empty. It's not chilly. It's not unkind. It's the sound of undeserved affection being removed. The sound of you rediscovering your energy, time, and soul. The sound of people finally recognizing that what they had mistaken for unlimited grace was never free. It was a gift, and now it's gone. Allow them to sit in the ruins. Let them ponder. Allow them to inquire. Allow them to hunt for the well. They drain dry, but do not return. Don't explain. Do not reduce your size to make them more comfy. You did not come this far to provide for those who refuse to feed themselves. The well is closed. The season has changed, and the choice is do not return. The weight of contempt has settled hard now, not your shoulders, but theirs. They are shaken not by the loss of you, but by the discovery of an imbalance that they had previously neglected. They sense the emptiness of a one-sided discussion, as well as the agony of having their own entitlement revealed. They reject the transformation with outdated techniques like cloaked guilt, fake pain, and charges of greed disguised as care. However, the earth underneath them is shaky. Their fantasy dissolves the instant you refuse to explain or be influenced by duty. They demand the same reaction and consistent presence. However, they are greeted with nothing. Their queries remain unanswered. Their requests were unfulfilled. They never questioned your tiredness, your sacrifice, or the subtle ways you bent to accommodate them. However, the moment you demand recognition, the moment you take away their comfort, you become the adversary in their tale. Allow them to rework the story any way they like. Allow them to fabricate stories of treachery. Let people murmur about your apparent brutality. Because, in the end, the reality is unaltered. They never got to retain what they took for granted. And now they have to face the actual cost of a generosity they never appreciated. There was a time when each inquiry required a response. Every question needed to be cleared, and every misunderstanding required an explanation. It felt essential, and duty to convert oneself into a language they have refused to learn. You tried thinking again and over again, hoping that clarity would lead to recognition, that patience would be greeted with comprehension. But they weren't listening, were they? They just heard what suited them. They distorted your statements to justify their actions. I mistook your pity for license to take more. However, the discussion now ends before it even starts. There is no proclamation or dramatic goodbye, only one peaceful shift, a door that no longer opens at their request. They instantly detect that something has changed. That access is no longer readily granted. The first approach is subtle. A casual message, a thorough test of limits, a deliberate wait before the anticipation returns. Then comes the allegation. The sharp-edged remarks were supposed to bring you back in place. So this is who you are now. It's too wonderful to answer, acting as if you are superior than everyone else. But quiet no longer invites them to fill the void. It is final. Calls go ignored, and messages languish without being responded to. They strive for control, but there is nothing more to hold. They never asked why you bend so readily. They worry now that you've taken a hard stance. Let them. Allow them to alter the past. Whatever they want. The reality is unaltered. Explanation was never the key to understanding. And now they must deal with the void they created. They believe the door was always open. Now locks without the need for a key. No weapon made against you will flourish. The name is Isaiah. A lion does not turn when the jackals talk, and an eagle does not seek permission from the birds. And a child of God does not ask for room in a world where they were born to walk fearlessly in the storm that was supposed to shatter you, but instead purified you. The fire that was meant to devour you, instead polished you. And now, standing in the silence of your own power, you understand you've always had this serenity to claim. Everything seems different in the quiet. The burden that formerly hung on your shoulders like shackles, as well as the invisible duties that encircled your soul, have vanished. There is no more apologizing for your presence or justifying your existence. You wake up to find the air clean. The weight is gone, not because the world changed, but because you did. There is no more war to fight or persuade to undertake. The conflict ended when you understood you didn't have to fight in the first place. People sense it. Some welcome your presence with warmth, moving with elegance, without pretense, and without agenda. They notice what you carry, the serenity, the knowledge, the unshakable base that is unaffected by anything outside of oneself. They exhale near you, at ease in your company since they are also standing on firm footing. They, too, have discovered that calm is a choice rather than a location or condition. But there are others. Those who formerly relied too much on you without providing balance. Those who never thought that their actions had consequences. They are hesitant now. They falter. Their words are not flowing as effortlessly as previously. Their efforts to entice you back into their world fall short. It disturbs them, but they cannot articulate why. They feel a change. However, they do not grasp it. Something about you no longer bends to meet them or adapts to make them comfortable. The games they used to play, the little manipulations, the word twisting, and the meticulous orchestration of guilt and duty fail before they ever begin. They fidget. They glance aside. They look for a footing in an area that no longer belongs to them. And that's when they realize what happened. It is not punishment, keeping them at a distance. This is not retribution. It's merely the lack of what used to sustain them. The well has dried up, not because it was empty, but because it is no longer theirs to drink from. For so long, they believed that their access to you was permanent, that the doors they passed through would never shut. However, they never pondered the truth, that the minute you stepped into your wholeness, stopped shrinking to fit them, they lost their grasp. They should not have had to begin with. And now they have to sit in the reality they built. Because the minute you stopped seeking, explaining, and fighting for a place at a table that was never worthy of you, they recognized the light they mistook for weakness was never within their control. It is not theirs to claim, and it never will be. The chosen one. Let them ponder. Allow them to speak. Let them watch. But don't look back. The only option now is to go ahead. You set a table for me in the midst of my foes. Psalm 5. A wolf in sheep's clothes may mislead the flock, but not the shepherd. A candle may flicker in the wind, but it is unafraid of darkness. The flame was never borrowed. God put it there. When you are selected, your light is decreed. No power, whisper, or shadow can extinguish it. They perceive it before they are aware of their feelings. The change, the uncomfortable silence that surrounds you now. There was a time when they understood just what to say, how to tug the hidden strings, and how to turn the weight of their own troubles into something you would gladly shoulder. And for a long time it worked. You absorbed something that was not yours. You softened your own edges. You met them in their brokenness and called it compassion. But that moment is past. They now approach with the same performance, lamentations, and invisible shackles that they previously chained you with. But something is different. Their well-planned complaints are no longer heard. The traditional techniques are ineffective. They depended on compassion and anticipated quiet cooperation. It is no longer theirs to have. They sense it. Oh, they feel it. Their words falter in mid-sentence. Their confidence deteriorates. For a brief while, something unusual disrupts the rhythm they had previously controlled with ease. Your stillness. There was no attempt to rectify it. There is no promise to fix. There is no effort to soften the reality for their comfort. Just quiet. It's just presence. Just an imaginary line that separates what was and what will never be again. For the first time, they are forced to sit with themselves, which is excruciating since the weight they bore was never intended for you. And now, without your hands, they are too stable. They are left to confront the situation alone. They look for a reaction. A reaction? An indication that the former cycle is still active, but nothing occurs. You've become untouchable, not in rage or disobedience, but in silence and unwavering resolve, knowing that you are no longer accessible for draining. The truth is a gateway, and everyone has a choice. Some will go through it, discarding their illusions and confronting the truth they have spent years avoiding. Others will turn away, withdrawing into the arms of those who are still prepared to believe the falsehoods and play a game you have outgrown. So they take a step back. They have to do it, not because they want to. There is no room for them here. Allow them to speak. Allow them to inquire. Allow them to search for the version of you they previously knew. But don't turn around. Do not provide an explanation. The table is set. The feast is ready. And not everyone who has walked with you will be seated next to you. The game was previously predictable and easy, with a well-practiced routine that needed no thinking. A well-placed comment, a casual jab veiled in comedy, a subtle reminder of old scars, all geared to elicit a response, to initiate the cycle that guaranteed them dominance. And for a long time it worked. But suddenly something has changed. The signals they depended on no longer provide the desired outcomes. The initial effort to provoke is greeted with silence. They wait for the shift, the unavoidable defense, the jumbled explanation, to cushion the sting of their words. But nothing occurs. The balance shifts, and they are now the only ones left speaking. A second try. This time, it's harsher, louder. Tinged with desperation, it settles in the same quiet. They sense it right then. The lack of control, the disintegration of an implicit agreement. They never anticipated it would shatter. There is no obvious fury in your eyes. There's no bitterness. There is no need to prove anything. Just an unwavering, unreadable presence that swallows their speech. Oh, the room moves. Not around them, but near you. The same sentences that previously hit like arrows now float in the air, weightless and ineffectual. For the first time, they are required to listen. They are addressing themselves rather than you. Their voice, which is generally addressed with opposition or reason, receives only its own empty echo. And in that dreadful nothingness, they are forced to confront their greatest fear, an uncensored representation of who they really are. There was no conflict. There is no great statement of severance. Just the calm conviction that they no longer wield the authority they previously thought was theirs. If your heart is filled with God's blessings, let that love shine. Click the super thank you button and donate $1 or more to sow seeds of faith that will touch countless lives. Your giving exemplifies His richness. Be a channel for His grace, and watch His kingdom grow through you. They once served as the guiding force, the authoritative voice that formed your choices, the presence that determined the route of your trip, and they provided knowledge and guidance. You clung to the illusion of knowing. They carried the map to destinations you had yet to see. Back then, you listened with full faith, sure that their advice was invaluable. But time has a way of dispelling illusions. And eventually, their influence will no longer dictate your path. The change is imperceptible at first, like a too long gaze. A tone tinged with something unsaid. A cleverly phrased reminder of how much they have contributed, how far they have taken you. The expectations are obvious. Deference, appreciation, and silence. Loyalty to the role they previously performed. But something's changed now. You don't seek approval. Do not hesitate to be strong in your own choices. In that moment, they realize that authority is sliding away from them, and there is nothing they can do to stop it. You can see things unfold in real time. The wavering confidence, the measured words, the frightened look that had never existed before. They battle for footing, seeking for the past as if it can bind them to the power they once possessed. But you have already gone beyond it. They never had the authority that they boasted. It was borrowed, sustained only by your determination to believe in it. And now, in the full light of your own power, you return their teachings with a nod of thanks before walking away. There is no dispute, validation, or lingering demand for approval. They are left in the solitude, striving for control that no longer exists. Thus, if the sun sets you free, you will be free. Indeed, John, that a bird doesn't ask for permission to fly. When the cage door opens, a lion does not apologize for outgrowing the lair in which it was nurtured, and a chosen one does not remain shackled by expectations that were never theirs to bear. They meticulously constructed the structure, brick by brick, rule by rule. Each item is carefully positioned to ensure that you never question it. It was intended to bind you, not in shackles, but in duties so tightly wrapped around your soul that you mistaken them for love. The unsaid demands, the calm weight of responsibility, were so ingrained in you that you carried them without opposition. You've done this for a long time. You carried the burden they put on you, thinking it was yours to bear. But when you take a step back, something changes. Cracks start to appear where there were previously solid walls. The foundation they believed was impenetrable starts to shake under its own weight. Then the terror sets in. Not you, but them. Because the equilibrium they depended on was not genuine. It only worked when you held it up. First, they want your allegiance. They serve as a reminder of what they have done for you in the past. Regarding what you owe, not out of love, not from a true connection, but out of desperation. To keep you attached, to make you believe that your independence is too expensive to afford. And when it fails, they rewrite history. They alter the tale and modify recollections. Tell you that you misunderstood. You are the one who has changed too much, too quickly. The pressure increases. The phrases tighten around you like a rope waiting for you to snap. They are waiting for you to submit and return to the position they have given you. But you don't, and the stillness that follows speaks louder than any argument could ever do. The first barrier, the first refuse. The first time you say no, and don't explain yourself. It rattles them. They watch for hesitancy, expecting you to waver and revert to the version of yourself they can control. But you never do. The understanding comes slowly and cruelly. Inevitably, they have lost control. Some will fight harder. Their dread manifests itself as wrath, accusations, and frantic efforts to drag you back. Others will retract their absences, a modest admission that they don't know how to meet you where you are right now. And for a small minute, you may question whether I've gone too far. Have I been too harsh? Is this what freedom really costs? But then you see what remains. The hands that grasp for you, not out of expectation, but out of love. Voices that support rather than demand. And at that instant, the truth sinks into your soul, like heavenly fire. The people who were always supposed to be with you have never been afraid of your progress. Only those who wanted to contain you did. They almost completely ignored you at one point. Perhaps they made casual judgments about you because they felt you were still looking for approval, still ready to bow beneath the weight of their beliefs. However, they made an error in their calculations. Something in the air around you has changed, not because you want recognition, but because you no longer need it. Your words no longer appeal for acceptance. They remain constant, whether understood or not. And that transition is what worries them the most. Those who formerly remained in the shadows. Those who lived on subtle barbs, passive disdain, and well-concealed contempt start to fade away. They try to rekindle old dynamics by presenting bait cloaked in skepticism, tossing doubts like hooks in the sea, hoping for the usual pull. However, there is no reaction. There is no attempt to explain, no effort to reach them on their level. And that stillness, far from being a sign of weakness, becomes the loudest response because the space you've created is not looking for confrontation. It does not, however, flinch in response. Those who are drawn to your presence perceive the game being played and, without training, see the unraveling in real time. Those who are unable to adapt must make a choice, develop or vanish. Some double down, pressing forward in a last effort to recoup lost territory. Their statements were tinged with nostalgia for the version of you that they previously controlled. But reality dawns, gradually creeping in with obvious finality. There is no longer access, explanation, or invitation to return to the locations they formerly inhabited. They wait for opposition, expecting ancient wounds to open and pour out at their feet. However, all they get is silence, which speaks louder than any answer. And in that agonizing silence, they come to the revelation they dreaded most. What they formerly had over you is no longer there. They test the waters, looking for a footing in a world where their words used to govern how you responded. Smirk, taunt, condescending query. Bait is deliberately put in front of you, waiting for the response they anticipate. But it never arrives. You go by them without hesitation or ceremony, as if they did not exist. There is no defense, rebuttal, or acknowledgement. Just a smooth transition from a game you no longer play. And at that moment, truth strikes them like a quiet landslide. They no longer have the same level of impact. The regular patterns they depended on have vanished, leaving them adrift in their own irrelevance. It is not anger or conflict that bothers them, but the awful weight of being forgotten by someone whose attention they formerly had. They were confident they knew you and could draw you back. However, the person they recognize is no longer standing before them. You have evolved into something beyond their grasp, unshackled and untamed, refusing to shrink for their comfort. The realization is gradual, insidious, and irrevocable. They no longer have a place in your universe. And that reality, more than anything else, is what pulls them apart. For too long, they chipped away at you piece by piece, removing the bits they thought were too much, too wild, or inconvenient. They rewrote your story, defined what was acceptable, and persuaded you that your worth was determined by how well you fit inside their framework. But they were wrong. This was never about becoming someone different, about suppressing tenderness or embracing revenge. It was about reclaiming your identity, recovering the dispersed bits of oneself, dismissed, buried behind their expectations. You will no longer have to twist yourself to fit into a place that was never intended to accommodate you. You will no longer filter your life based on their acceptance. The discomfort people are experiencing in your presence is not your responsibility. It is up to them to reconcile their own reflection, which remains untouched by your absence, but is unsettled by your unwillingness to return. They mutter, they conjecture, they watch for signals of hesitancy, but nobody comes. There's no need to explain. There is no intention to soothe their bewilderment. There is no desire to get knowledge from individuals who just appreciate the version of you they can control. You walk onward, unbound, constrained only by your own truth. The weight has lifted, the restrictions have been removed, and you now stand in the fullness of your own being. Let them ponder, let them watch, but don't look back. The only option now is to go ahead.